Scotch and Sherry Casks Part 2, Understanding the Issues. This is the second part of a two-parter. We're continuing along in our handout from last week, and I wanted to give you the highlights of Rav Moshe's tshuva as well, which was written quite some time ago, Tafshin Ches, which is what year? 1948. Yeah. So it's written quite some time ago, before single malt Scotch was being fermented in sherry casks, or at least before it was coming to the United States, I should say. And that's why we saw Daniel Weiss's tshuva last week, where he had responded to Rav Moshe, saying that Rav Moshe's tshuva he felt he couldn't agree with because of the mitzias that we'll talk about again. Just to go over the sources that we saw, we noted that according to the Rishonim and the Shulchan Aruch paskins this way, that in order to make wine bottle in other beverages other than wine, normally we say you need 1 in 60 to make something bottle. But with wine, all you need is 1 in 6. And the reason that was given is because the wine is no Saint Tam Lifgam. It has a spoiled flavor once it's diluted to 1 in 6 parts of any other beverage. That's what had become clear from the Shulchan Aruch. The second thing we saw is that if you store beverages in a wine cask, in a wine barrel, any wine that seeps out is going to provide negative flavor. That was the second thing that we saw in the Shulchan Aruch. And therefore the Shulchan Aruch was okay for you to take a barrel that had previously been used to store non-kosher wine and to store water in it or any other beverage, even what it had said was spicy beverages, beverages like vinegar and things like that, which are more likely to draw out flavor. Nonetheless, the Shulchan Aruch was prepared to say that it's totally okay, and we saw an exception from the Magen Avram in Hilchos Pesach. The Magen Avram said that that's provided that the previous wine that was being stored in the barrels was not yayin saraf, was not a a cognac, or like a concentrated kind of liquor that has a wine base. He says in that situation, any seepage that comes out could actually be no Saint Tam Lishvach, but as long as it's regular wine, even, says the Magen Avram, if it seeps out into beer or into other liquids like yayin saraf, the Magen Avram wanted to say that that's fine. Okay, and so things seem to be riding high. I mean, things seem to be wonderful. All you need is 1 in 6. So even if you have actual wine in a mixture, the tam should be bottled. We also saw that even when the new item being stored in the sherry casks is yayin saraf, which is liquor, that also you can be lenient. So everything seemed to be okay based on the original earlier sources. But then we saw the tshuva from Rav Weiss, who was really responding to Rav Moshe's tshuva, and he said that he had heard that in America, a great posek had said that blended whiskey is okay, but he had to find out where the Dayan was, which was in the UK, in Manchester, whether the same applied, the mitzias applied in the whiskey that they drink in the UK, which is mostly Scotch. And so he described the mitzias, he described the actual manufacturing process. When he was writing the tshuva, which was Tafshin Tes Zayin, several years, maybe about 7-8 years, after the tshuva that Rav Moshe wrote, it's in the 1950s, right? So it's not like it's very recent, but he was basically saying that already in the 1950s, the sherry casks that they had previously used only for convenience, because sherry casks were available in abundance and they were generally brought in from other parts of the continent over to Scotland, and that's what they would store Scotch in. But Daniel Weiss said that he discovered from experts that once those sherry casks no longer became available, they were actually priming regular oak casks with wine in order to be, and actually charring or smoking the wine into the barrels in order to give them a certain flavor that would eventually, over the course of years of fermentation, seep out into the Scotch. And it was on that basis that Daniel Weiss felt that he could not agree, someone opened the door over there, that he could not agree with Rav Moshe's leniency, and therefore felt that you had to be machmir, and that you could not permit any Scotch or liquor that had been fermenting in sherry casks. Okay? Now, I told you last week we're going to go straight to the tshuva from Rav Miller, but I felt that instead of jumping the gun, let me show you a few lines from Rav Moshe so that you should see the original tshuva inside. We're not going to see the whole tshuva, we're just going to see maybe about a third of the text that I've underlined for you. The first part that we're going to see from Rav Moshe's tshuva, first of all, it's interesting that he's writing to Rav Pinchas Teitz, who was the founder and the Morada Asra of the Elizabeth, New Jersey community. And apparently the reason why Rav Teitz was writing to him was because Rav Teitz was giving a hechsher on liquor in the United States in the 1940s to make sure that the Balabatim, when they made l'chaims, would be drinking kosher liquor, American whiskey. And so Rav Moshe writes, and I have this in the bold, it's in the first paragraph, this is in the addendum that I gave you tonight. And he writes as follows, Kibalti michtavo hayakar, bidvar hayayin saraf blended. I got your very nice letter regarding blended whiskey. She tachas hashgachaso osid blended shelo betarubas yayin v'glycerin. That under your hashgacha, you're making sure that the whiskey they manufacture is without any added wine or glycerin, which could come from a non-kosher source. Va'ani omer lo yiyasher kocho bazeh, sheyeh ra'ui lemahadrin lizaher midvarim shetzarech haroas chacham. And I tell you basically shkoyach, because you're doing something that for mahadrin, for people who want to be medactic and very meticulous in their observance, you're doing the right thing, because you need the psak of a chacham in this kind of scenario, etc., where when in a situation where there are people who say that the blended liquor is usher and those others say that it's mutter, in any situation where some say it's okay, some say it's not okay, it's always better to be machmir and go with those who say that it's not okay. And so therefore what you're doing is you're going in a situation where you're avoiding any kind of controversy by making sure that there are no additives to the liquor. Va'ani af sha'ani matir, he says, but I, says Rav Moshe, I permit blended whiskey that has wine and glycerin added to it. I don't have a problem with it. However, ani ba'atzmi, nizhar ani ba'atzmi milishtot blended rak b'chabura. He says, but I'm careful never to drink it on my own. Rav Moshe was a public drinker. He was not a private drinker. Whereas basically what he's saying is that if someone offers me a l'chaim of blended whiskey that has this wine additive, I will drink it. I'm not going to be that careful. Why? Shelo lemechzi ki yuhara. Hayiti shosem mashuhu levarecha mesubin kenohu. He says, I will make a l'chaim and take a little tiny sip of the blended whiskey that has a little wine added to it, because I don't want to look like I'm a Bal Gaiva by saying mitornished. I only drink the Mahadran stuff, and I want to be able to give a bracha. You know, Zolzain the Neshama should have an aliyah. You know, basically, what is he talking? The person makes a tikkun after Shacharis, and he brings a bottle of schnapps. So if Moshe says, I'm not going to check the hechsher if a person's got yortzeit and he wants me to make a l'chaim for his deceased relative. The Zolzain and Neshama have an aliyah, make a l'chaim, take a small sip. I'm not going to make a scene.
You're not saying that it's good. You're just relying on someone else saying that.
He's saying af sha'ani matir, even though I say that such blended whiskey is mutter, and the proof is that I myself will take a little sip if I am offered it in public, because I don't want to look like I'm a big shot. I don't want to think that people will think of me that I abstain, from the rest of the crowd. V'lachein vaday tov sheyeh yayin sarf blended below shum chashash. But that's why I think that what you're doing is a great thing. It says, if it wasn't for the fact that someone would offer it to me in public, I would never drink it, because it is proper to be machmir. But me'ikar hadin, the letter of the law dictates that it's mutter. So the reason why I wanted you to see the opening paragraph is that in itself is an entire musar shmuz. that opening paragraph is a Musar Shmuz of what a gadol is. A gadol knows that, number one, he knows halacha, so he knows when something is mutter or aser, and even when he's machmir for himself, he's not going to be ostentatious about his own personal stringencies. If he wants to be machmir, he'll do it in the privacy of his home, but he's not going to make a public statement, by saying, I will not drink your whiskey. Okay, I think that's a beautiful thing, and there's much more to dwell on. Now let's go to the next paragraph, we'll just read the underlined sections. Avaladina hayayin saraf blended asher yeshchashem emarvin b'chelak echad me'arboim yayin mutter b'shtia. He said, but the truth of the matter is that they are allowed to, by law, add up to 1/40th of wine without listing it in the ingredients, and I therefore hold that it's permitted. Daha nifsak b'simin kufla medal sif hey the yain bottle b'shisha chalakim. And my first argument is, as we saw ourselves in the Shulchan Aruch, that all you need is 6 parts other beverage to 1 part wine in order for the wine to no longer be considered halachically a problem. Okay? Va'av shekasav hashach, we're just skipping to the underlined sections. Va'av shekasav hashach b'simin kufla medal sifkat and chaf aleph the betavshul shemashbicho aser ad shishim. He says, maybe you'll argue that the wine improves the flavor, and therefore you should require 60 times just like any other prohibited substance. Ein biyayin sarav chumras tavshil. He says, but that doesn't include wine. He says, da'adarabba matzinu shitas harashbatz shebemashkim charifim keshecher chidoma mispatel od bepachos imrak harovhu shecher le'inyan bracha v'nifsak bo ba'orachayim simin reish beis if aleph barama. And he says, I'll prove it to you. He says, when it comes to mashkim charifim, which means, how would you, charif, we normally say spicy, but it doesn't really mean spicy, sharp or strong beverages, hard beverages, like beer and other kinds of hard alcoholic beverages, the Magen Avram the Ramah paskins that you don't even need 6 times the wine in the other beverage, in the beer, to make it batel. Even just 51%, it's batel berov, because the wine loses any of its real attractive flavor when it's mixed in with other sharp or alcoholic beverages. He then deliberates. Maybe you'll argue that that's only as far as that loses its bracha of bori pri hagafen, and it gets a bracha of shahakol. That's all the Ramah was talking about, but maybe it's still, if it's a forbidden wine, maybe it's still forbidden. Rav Moshe rejects that kind of distinction. He says if something no longer is bori pri hagafen, it's no longer halachically wine, and the rabbis only forbade Gentile wine. They did not forbid any other Gentile manufactured beverage. Once it no longer has the status of wine as far as its bracha is concerned, it no longer has the status of wine as far as being a forbidden substance. We go on. Just go on to the next underlined section. He says, "Va'ayin b'magen Avram simin reish dalet sifkat tezayin sha'af shedaito gam kein she'efshir bishar mashkin lo nispatel mishum she'efshir shein mafsidin tam hayayin v'hu kehanakudos hakesef." He says that the whole idea of other beverages, when you have water mixed with wine, you need 6 parts to 1 to make the wine batel. But the Shach deliberates and he says maybe that's only with water, because water dilutes wine. Maybe if you have other alcoholic beverages, the wine is not batel, 1 in 6. Maybe you need more in order to make it batel. Aval masik shebiyeno shalanu vaday batel. But then the Shach says something important, and he says, the Magen Avram says something important, and he says, that may be true in the old days when wine was much stronger in the Talmudic period. But today, when Magen Avram is speaking in the 17th century, he says, today our wine is much weaker than it used to be, and therefore certainly our wine will be batel in 1 in 6 parts. The kavanaso shebiyeno shalanu she'enam chazakim kol kach gam hu moda lahataz the batel b'shisha af b'sha'ar mashkin. And therefore what the Magen Avram means to say is that even though there would be some conceptual reason to be machmir, like the Shach, but that's only if we had the wine of the Talmudic times. Today our wine that's manufactured in Europe, where the Magen Avram lived, is very weak, and therefore you can certainly rely on the Taz that nowadays, in the more modern era, all you need is 6 times other beverages to make wine batel. Next section. V'hinei b'matei Yehonasan, Simen Kuf Yud Daled, Kasav L'chalik D'cheshayayin Mashbiach L'mashkin Oser Ad Shishin, V'rak b'mayim u'mashkin she'enom nishbachim min hayayin, V'lek Elesa Rak Mishum Tam Yayin Batel B'shisha Ayin Sham. So, the Matei Yehonasan wants to argue as follows. He says the only time that we can say that something is bottle in 6 parts, that wine is bottle in 6 parts, is if it doesn't improve the flavor of the majority beverage. Like if you dilute wine in water, it's not going to improve the flavor. But what if you put it into another beverage where diluted wine does improve the flavor? So there, this posek wants to argue that you should need 60 times in order for it to be bottle, not just 6. And therefore, you're going to have a problem with this blended whiskey because they put in up to a 40th. Aval ena muvan klal. D'chiyayin pogem es hamayim havade lo nakachi shametzius shahar b'bnei adam nosnim ma'at yayin b'hamayim sheshosim lahatim yoser. So Rav Moshe says the whole premise doesn't make any sense. You want to argue that diluted wine, which has 6 parts water and 1 part wine, the wine has a bad flavor, and it's not tasteful anymore. It adds a negative flavor to that beverage. He says, that doesn't make sense. When you think about it, I know, Rav Moshe says, I know plenty of people who will have a glass of water and put a little bit of wine in it to give it a little bit of sweetness. He says, we know many people who do that. So what is the whole premise of even suggesting, and this is the key issue, this is the key argument that Rav Moshe is going to be providing, which is going to turn everything upside down that we've learned up until now. Rav Moshe's argument is an argument of mitzias. He says the whole premise that diluting wine and water is what's called nosein tam lifgam, it creates a negative flavor, is not true. Because I know plenty of people who will add a small amount to a tall glass of water to give it a little extra sweetness. So how can you tell me that it's nosein tam lifgam? It adds a negative flavor. You hear the question? Because this is the real point, and this is the most important point in the whole tshuva of Rav Moshe. And therefore, and this is what you'll see, Rav Miller picks up on this. And therefore, Rav Moshe says, "Ach hadem mutarhu mishum da'al kol panim maklish tam hayayin shuhurak kiyuha ba'alma," etc., etc. And the answer is, says Rav Moshe, is that when the poskim say, and when the Shulchan Aruch writes that it's nosein tam lifgam, it doesn't literally mean that it creates a net negative flavor. That's not what it means, even though everywhere else in Shulchan Aruch, when we use the term nosein tam lifgam, it means it adds a bad flavor. It's not what it means over here. What it means here is that the wine is no longer wine. The wine loses its status as wine and becomes kiyuha ba'alma. Now what does that mean? What is the term kiyuha? Does anyone know what the term kiyuha means? Kiyuha means blood juice or gravy. And what Rav Moshe is making a comparison to is that the Pri Megadim in Hilchos Taruvos gives a fascinating analysis to the whole idea, the whole conceptual halachic idea of blood. You know, when you salt a piece of meat, we say that the meat is kosher. Or when you roast a piece of meat to extract the meat is kosher because you've extracted the blood, right? Now, how many of you have had a rare steak where when you cut your knife into the steak, red stuff spurts out, right? That happens all the time, right? No one can deny their personal experience. So how can that piece of meat be kosher if there's still blood in it? And the Torah prohibits blood.
Blood is not prohibited within the meat.
What's that?
The blood is not prohibited in the meat.
All right, so midorais it's not, but midorabanan it still is. In other words, the fact is, what is blood and what is not blood? We know that salt does not draw out all the blood from the meat. It draws out a significant amount of blood. It draws out the surface blood, but so much of the internal blood still remains within the tissue. It's impossible, physically impossible, to completely separate blood from the tissue. So what's the explanation? The explanation is that halachically, that's no longer called dam. There is halachic reality and then there's physics reality. There's physical reality. Like scientific reality dictates that the initial blood that is extracted from the meat is no different from the remaining juices that are inside the meat. It's one continuum of the blood fluids that are contained within the tissue. But halacha says differently. Halacha says that once you've salted that piece of meat, you've extracted that which the Torah doesn't want you to consume, and any fluids that remain inside the tissue is no longer prohibited in halacha. It's called kiyuha. It's a juice, but it's not blood. Chemically, it's no different. It's perhaps just a little bit diluted in its let's say hemoglobin, right? Just to cite the chemical term, right? It may have a little bit less hemoglobin because you've drawn out the most concentrated components of red cells, but they're still red cells. What?
It's still hemoglobin.
It's still hemoglobin, and so but halachically it's not dam. And the same thing, Rav Moshe doesn't talk about this, but the same thing can be argued in Hilchas Nida in many situations, where there's a difference between what is halachically asr and what is halachically mutter. Even many times the fluids are maybe chemically very similar. And Rav Moshe is making the same argument over here. Once you dilute wine in water, even if the wine provides a flavor or a taste that you actually like, some people enjoy a glass of water with a little, slightly sweetened with a little bit of wine. But that's not halachically wine anymore. And if it's not halachically wine, it's no longer under the prohibition of stam yenim. Chemically, it's there. And that's what Rav Moshe argues, that's the definition of no sin tam lifgam over here. It's not that it adds a net negative taste. It's that it's no longer halachically wine.
It's like it's programmed to the category of stam yenim.
That's right. That's one way of putting it. Yeah.
Still dam?
Yeah, it's still dam, right?
Does it make a difference which way you go? In other words, his example, if you add water to a glass of wine, right, or if you add a little bit of water to a flask, to a barrel of wine, you can see that could be pogame because it takes something away. His example, though, is if I have a little bit of water and I want to put in a little bit of wine inside, because people taste it, maybe a different, in other words...
Oh, you just want to say because of kama bottle? I don't know what...
No, just in terms of planencies. In other words, if a person has a barrel of wine,
Yeah.
put in a little bit of water into that barrel of
A
wine.
little bit of water is meziga. Then it's still wine. Halachically, that's still wine. That's what yayin mazug is. Because you're giving the wine its proper diluted properties.
But not in the barrel, right? You would take the barrel, you would mosgin loco, you would pour it from there and then into some water.
Yeah, into some water, right.
I just
right.
wonder if it works both ways. In other words, the idea is that you could be poging something, it could be more of a pegima to a person who's keeping a barrel of wine and then you add water to that versus a person who adds a little bit of wine into their glass and they make spritz.
Right, but the bottom line...
What he's saying. He's
right.
saying basically you're changing pegima, we're calling it the pegima that is no longer wine.
That's right. And that's the bottom line. As long as you have the 1-to-6 ratio of water to wine, 6 to 1, then it's not that the wine is not there anymore. The wine is still there, but it doesn't have a din wine. It's no longer called wine. And on that basis, Rav Moshe wants to argue that blended whiskey, like Southern Comfort, which has this percentage of wine in it, he wants to argue that that's not usser because even though you can still taste the wine, but it does what you're tasting, that little flavor of wine that you're tasting, doesn't have a din, doesn't have a shem yayin anymore, and therefore it's not under the rubric of stam yayin. Okay, good. Let's just read a few more lines. V'im kain, just the next underlined section. Ma lanu shetam kolush hazeh shelo nechshav ki ha'isr mashpiach es hamashkin ha'al kol panim leka isr. He says, therefore, it doesn't matter whether the wine improves the flavor or diminishes the flavor. It's not wine anymore, and therefore there's no forbidden substance here. V'im yesh makom lechalek hurak de'ulai mashkin acherim ein maklishin tam hayayin. He says the only argument that you could possibly make is that maybe there are certain kinds of beverages other than water that don't completely neutralize or weaken the flavor of wine. V'zeu kavanas hamagin Avram shekosav the dafka mayim mafsidim upogim esayayin Aval sha'ar mashkim efshar she'ein pogim im ayin sham, shehu yil'inyan lahaklish lo yischashe ketam yain, aval lo le'inyan pegimas hamayim. He says, that's the argument of the Mogen Avram. He says that it's dafka water that dilutes and sort of degenerates the status of the wine. But it could be that other beverages maybe don't make the wine lose its distinctive flavor. But as far as water is concerned, we're not concerned about that water is not weakening the wine. He says, but the bottom line is, but he says, but that's not how we paskin. I'm just trying to read it. Ibrit Lashon Aran Shebozan Mashmash Pogim Mayim Aval Kasbring Lashon Basof Masik Rak Mitam Shu Kiyuha Mati Yonasan in Muvonim V'gam in Nema Kedvar Sheish Lesser Hech Denosan Leshbichas Amashmash Lo Lesser Af Rishishim V'Yoser V'Lchein Ladina Ein Lachosh Lesser. But he says bottom line is that I'm not going to be choshesh for it because according to that shita you'd have to aser anything that has less than 60 parts beverage to the wine, and I'm not choshesh for that. Okay, let's go to the next paragraph. Va'od yesh lahatir oso hablended shalon yersham sheyesham yain v'hachshash hu rak mishum shirashayin michok hamedina shelo lahazkir hamin shema'arvin mimenu rak echad me'arbaim v'imkein efsher irvu sham yain. He says, and this is certainly true that we have more room for leniency if you don't know for a fact whether or not that wine has been added to the beverage or not. Let's say, he says, because the whole argument that was being presented to Rav Moshe was that based on U.S. law, FDA law, you can have up to 1/40th of an additive without adding it to the label on the ingredients. So his argument is, he says, if there's nothing written on the label that says that wine was put in, there's certainly a reason to be lenient. Havadai sheyesh blended shelo irvu sham yain rak minim kisherim o yain saraf yashan bechadash v'kevin shu iser derabanan talinan lekula. He says many times blended whiskey doesn't mean blended with wine, it means blended with other whiskeys. And therefore there's plenty of reason to be lenient when you have no evidence explicitly that wine was added, because we're dealing with an iser derabanan at best, of stam yenam, of Gentile wine, and therefore you can certainly be lenient if you don't have absolute information. Okay, next. V'kol shekain hacha sheyadua sheyesh harbe factories she'ein ma'arvin yain v'hayayin saraf blended imkein yesh lahatir kol stam blended diyesh litlos lekula. And therefore, since we know that there are many factories that don't add wine, there's plenty of reason to be lenient when we don't know one way or the other. V'rak be'im yadua she'irvu sham yayin leka sham heter zeh ach mikol makom yesh lahatir mitam harishon shehu kehataz shehachros adin kemoso v'gam sheyoser mashma shegam hashach lo polagolov b'mashkim charifim kidule el. He says, if you know for a fact, like by Southern Comfort, where they tell you that they put in wine, you don't have this leniency, but even with that, you can still be lenient, because we hold that as long as there's 6 parts whiskey to 1 part wine, you can be lenient as well. Skip to the next page. He says, and we're skipping a few lines, because he deals with other issues of ein mevat lenis or lachatchila, which we're not going to get into now. He says, zehu ladina. So everything that I've wrote up until now is the letter of the law. Avol baal nefesh yesh lo lahachmir al atzmo mitzad kamach shashot. But a baal nefesh, remember we tried to define that term last week. What would you call a baal nefesh? A scrupulous individual, a person who's trying to be worried about his neshama, worried about his soul, wants to make sure, that he doesn't ingest anything that could potentially be spiritually injurious. He says he should be machmir, and there are a number of reasons why there are to be machmir. Number one, because many poskim paskin that even today, where people are not pagans, they still say that stam yenam, you're not allowed to get any benefit. Not only are you not allowed to consume it, but you're not allowed to get any benefit. And if you're not allowed to get any benefit from it, then just having more volume in your bottle of whiskey that's a result of stam yenam is in a sense getting hana from it. And that creates a problem.
I don't understand this line. Isn't the whole premise that we're worried about this? About stam yenam?
Yeah, but up until now, he's been,
saying now, by the way, Rabbi Abraham, I mean, the whole premise is that we do paskin like this, otherwise it would just question
no.
get off the ground, remember?
There's a difference between stam yenam aser b'shtia or aser bahana. Up until now, he's been working under the assumption that stam yenam is only aser b'shtia, but not aser bahana. It's only, you only can't drink it, but you're allowed to benefit from it. So if it's only aser b'shtia, so all of my heterim hold fast, right? If it's aser bahana, in addition to being aser b'shtia, so then it's a little bit more problematic.
Don't we generally say that stam yenim is asur b'hana?
We generally are machmir that stam yenim is aser bahana. When, let's say you get a gift of a bottle of wine, you can't just pass it on to a Gentile friend and get hana from it. So we generally are machmir when people ask us this shaila. So he says, since so many people are machmir, he says, va'af mehamatirin yesh shesavri duhu dafke b'makam hefsid. And even those who say that you are allowed to benefit from stam yenam, that's only when a financial loss, you stand to lose financially, because let's say you thought something was not manufactured by Gentiles, but it turns out that it was, and you're going to lose your whole investment, so then we let you be lenient and we let you sell it, right? But v'imkein lamasha bi'arti sheyesh la'adam hana'a mimayim shenosan l'sham ma'at yayin d'bishvil zen nosein, he says, and therefore, if people add a little wine to improve the flavor of a glass of water, so then you are getting hana. Okay, fine. It may not be halachically wine anymore, but you're still benefiting from that which was originally stam yenam. V'gam lo nachichish hametzias shehu mutam yoser bishvil hayayin lo gara tam ki yuha mehana ba'al masha'aser. And therefore, Rav Moshe wants to argue, if you're benefiting from it in some way, even though halachically it's no longer stam yenam, but you're benefiting from the adding of stam yenam to this beverage, and therefore there's reason to be machmir. Then he says.
I find this a very circular logic. In other words, if you're going to uproot the shtia, then there's no more hana left. Because it's only if you have a shtia problem that you could argue that there's hana. If you're not,
His taina is.
I mean, I've already dismissed that it's not wine, so now you're having hana.
It's not wine.
Right. It's not halachically stam yenam anymore once you've added it to the water.
Right.
But lemaisa, you're getting hana from something that was, when it was added to the water, it was stam yenam. So that's all being neheneh from stam yenam. That's his argument. He says, even though halachically now it's not stam yenam, but lemaisa, you're being neheneh from that which, when it was added, was stam yenam.
If I had a liquor store, I would have a problem.
Yes, theoretically you'd have a problem selling stam yenam if you own a liquor store. But we won't go into the Choshen Mishpat issues right now. So therefore he says, what, based on what I explained in my chidushim, laharbe rishonim shekshiyesh tam hu ki yeshno be'en gam betam kiyu yesh lahachshiv ki be'en rak nishtana miyayin ledavar acher ula'afar shesh leser bahana uvishtiya im yesh lo hana mizeh. See, basically, if you go through this whole next two paragraphs of Rav Moshe's tshuva, he says even things that have changed from their original state to something that is that, let's say you take food, for example, you take bone and you convert it into gelatin. It goes through an entire chemical change. So the whole reason why we aser gelatin is because you're being neheneh from something that is a davar ha'aser, or potentially basar b'chalav, right? Even though it's chemically changed. He says over here too, it's chemically changed. It doesn't have halachically the status of wine, but it's still aser b'hana if you're getting hana from it. That's his argument. Anyway, that's his first argument. Sheinis, his second argument. The harbe rishonim savri the gam yayin b'mayim tzarich shishim. He says, but remember, the shach had paskined, not like the Taz. The shach had paskined that even wine needs 1 in 60, not 1 in 6, like the Taz argued. V'yesh lebal nefesh lachush gam l'shitasam, af she'hamachaber v'harama yichriu kam mekilim shabatel b'shisha. So even though the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah are lenient, but the shach is machmir, and therefore they have reason to be machmir. And then the third argument, shlish, is the halkol panim das anakudos hakesef mashmi yoser, da oser b'sha'ar mashkim ad shisha. And furthermore, the Shach says that especially when the other beverage is not water, but it's other beverages, then there the wine does improve the flavor, and you do need 60 times. And therefore, he says, V'yesh lebal nefesh lachush lazeh, af sheyesh gam lefarish tuhurak lamashkin shein charifin, even though you could argue that that's not referring to strong or hard beverages, but nevertheless, there's still room to be machmir. And Revius, the fourth reason to be machmir, he says, is shitas mata yehonasan shebamashkin shnitan lahashbiach asur. He says that any time wine improves the flavor, we should always asur it 1 in 60. Va'av shebedvarav ena muvanim, even though I couldn't understand what he said, because lamaisa, we said that then wine should never be bottled, even in water, because wine improves, even a diluted wine improves the flavor of water. Nonetheless, a bal nefesh should be machmir like the mate yehonasan. And the final paragraph he writes, Zehu anachon lanias daiti lahalacha ulamaisa, v'lachein vaday sha'af she'en le'esor, and therefore, this is my opinion, and therefore we should never say that it's usher to our communities, but davar tov asa yididi kavot taraso shara she'yeh blended yadua shehu below yain v'lo chash iser acher, kedei she'yeh roi gam lebal nefesh haroi lehem lahachmir, v'lachein amina lifa'ola tava demar yiyasher. And therefore, I applaud you for what you did, because even though me'ikar hadin we can be lenient, but a bal nefesh should be machmir for all of the reasons that I've itemized, and therefore what you did was correct to give hashgacha to a whiskey factory that wants to be kosher for everybody. Okay? So that's the tamtzit of Rav Moshe's tshuva. The problem with Rav Moshe's tshuva is that he doesn't deal in the mitzias that we deal with today, which is sherry casks. There are those who wish to argue that when you have sherry casks, the wine is so absorbed into the walls of the barrel that you may not even have 1 in 6 as far as the ratio. If you take the entire volume of the thick-walled casks and you compare them to the contents that are inside the barrel, you may not even have 1 in 6. But here's another interesting argument that I saw in that book that I showed you yesterday in English. Now, Rav Miller of the COR holds like his Rebbe Rav Moshe, and I told you last time we would take a look at that. But the fact of the matter is that once you've seen Rav Moshe's tshuva, you understand Rav Miller's line of reasoning. Rav Miller's line of reasoning is that once, according to Psak Halacha, wine that is diluted is no longer has the status of wine, so then even if it's no sein tam lishvach, even if the Scotch manufacturers make a specific point of soaking the barrels in wine for extended periods of time before they will allow the Scotch to be fermented in those barrels, even though it's clear that they are trying to add some kind of flavor from the wine into the Scotch, nevertheless, you can be lenient because all it is kiyuha ba'alma. All it is this non-wine flavor because it doesn't have the status of wine anymore. Now, remember, but the Rav Moshe that Rav Miller is relying upon still says, but roy lebal nefesh lahachmir. A bal nefesh should still be machmir. And you notice that Rav Moshe said this multiple times. There's another argument against this Rav Moshe. Number one, many poskim disagree with Rav Moshe. Take a look at the back of the handout that you got last week from this sefer called Wine, Whiskey, and Halacha, starting on page 89. It starts with the header E, process to ensure maximum wine taste proves not like the above. And he writes as follows. Many poskim disagree with the assertion of Rav Shlomo Miller Shlita and rule that we must take the good wine flavor being imparted into account in our halachic decision. The reasoning is that since we find that special processes are being done in order to extract the maximum amount of wine flavor from the barrel, It is therefore clear that we must fully consider the wine flavor in our determination of its halachic impact. Shulchan Aruch writes that wine blios absorbed by a barrel are detrimental to the taste of the beverage that follows, that will be called no sein tam lifgam, right? This was referring to a case in which one had a leftover barrel that was previously used for wine, and then he subsequently placed another beverage into that barrel. The blios of that barrel are null in the second beverage, and therefore the new liquid is permissible. However, it is clear nowadays that we are not discussing the simple barrel of long ago. The Scotch experts write that much time, effort, and money are expended to ensure that the wine flavor is preserved in the sherry casks while they are imported. Some companies actually ship the casks with some wine inside them to ensure that the flavor stays inside. Others use a process called charring or toasting, which we read in Daniel Weiss's tshuva, before maturing the Scotch inside the wine barrel. This process does not burn out the wine taste, but rather essentially cooks the wine flavor, enhancing it so that it is fully absorbed by the Scotch. There are some companies that actually buy new barrels, then lend them to wine companies to use. This ensures that the desired wine taste is imparted into the barrel and not tampered with at all. It is clear that these processes distinguish our sherry casks from the barrels used in wine in the times of Shulchan Aruch. Therefore, we must fully recognize the desirable taste and not merely disregard it as kiyuha ba'alma, the term that Rav Moshe had used. Not only are our casks different from the simple barrels of the times of Chazal, it would appear that the sherry cask might receive the halachic status of cheres hadriani. Cheres hadriani is a term that is employed by the Gemara. Let's see how he explains it. These were specialized pottery casks that were used specifically to absorb the flavor of the wine in order to later impart that taste into water. The Gemara talks about soldiers traveling for long distances. They would take shards of pottery that had been soaking in wine for extended periods of time, in concentrated wine, and since it wasn't practical for them to travel with wine, what they would do is that whenever they would find a body of water, they would take their container, fill it with water, and then drop in the cheres hadriani, this hadrianic pottery shard, and it would seep out into the water so that they could have some beverage that they found to be enjoyable that would have the flavor of wine. That's what cheres hadriani is, even in the times of the Gemara. And he says that a similar idea is quoted in the name of Rav Belsky Zatzal, who was the posek for the OU. Cheres hadriani is viewed as a special barrel that imparts tam lishvach, a good taste. And he's referring to, if you take a look at footnote 85, he says Rav Belsky has also said that in some instances, such as when they use refurbished sherry casks, the intention of storing the whiskey in these barrels is to draw out the flavor. Perhaps this should be compared to cheres hadriani and not to regular barrels. Cheres hadriani was pottery that was allowed to absorb much wine so that the flavor could be extracted later. The Mishnah in Avodah Zarah says that wine absorbed in cheres hadriani remains aser bahana. If these blios remain aser bahana, they can aser the whiskey even if they are batel b'shishim, since it is ikro lekach, since it was essentially created for that purpose. Even in Shishim, Rav Belsky wanted to argue. So go back to the next paragraph, and he writes, if cheres hadriani was used for stam yenam, then there is no question that any later liquid would be forbidden due to the blios in the pottery cask. Similarly, the sherry casks that are used will forbid the Scotch because they are comparable to this high absorbency cask, which was used to impart maximum flavor. Certainly, the wine flavor is not lifgam. For this reason, many poskim disagree with Rav Miller's reasoning and consider that the wine imparts a good taste, which might forbid the Scotch. But as we've already noted from Rav Moshe's language, it's irrelevant whether it is imparting good taste or bad taste. The bottom line is that for Rav Moshe, since it doesn't have the status of wine anymore, it only has the status of kiyuha ba'alma, that's the issue. That's the metzias. It doesn't have the status of wine, and since Chazal only forbade stam yenam, and this is no longer wine, but rather just the juices after you've salted the meat, or it's the remnant of wine after it's been diluted. It's not wine itself, so it's irrelevant to Rav Moshe whether it imparts positive or negative flavor.
And why does he say, therefore we must fully recognize the desirable taste and not merely disregard it as kiyah?
his argument is that because it was specifically chosen for this purpose, the people who are the manufacturers have upgraded this beverage, this diluted wine, to make it into something that is considered still to be wine. And this is really the point of the machlokas. The point of the machlokas is, how do we regard the wine that's absorbed in these sherry casks? Does it still have the status halachically of wine, in which case it's going to be aser, or does it not? Rav Moshe really was the most lenient. Rav Miller is the one who follows sort of in Rav Moshe's footsteps. But it seems like all modern day poskim, with that exception, do take some level of stringency on the matter of sherry casks. Now, one more leniency I just wanted to point out, maybe we'll finish a little bit earlier tonight. One added leniency I wanted to point out is that even in this Sefer, Wine, Whiskey, and Halacha, he wishes to argue that if you're dealing with a Scotch that has had multiple finishing casks, because that's what some of the Scotches do. They'll say, it's been finished in 3 different kinds of casks. Have you seen that on the label? Mm-hmm. Like it starts off with a bourbon cask, and then it goes to a sherry cask, and then it goes to an oak cask. He says, there, if you know that there are other additives that seep into the liquor other than sherry, and sherry is only one of the additives, there's even more reason to be lenient, since you're not getting purely the wine flavor. And therefore, there's more reason to be lenient in that situation. So if a person were to be machmir and not paskin like Rav Moshe, which according to many poskim is not a chumrah, that many poskim say Rav Moshe we simply disagree with Rav Moshe, he is mistaken about the mitzias, and therefore we hold that it has the din of yayin. But even they might be makel in a scenario where there are multiple additives, where it's clearly not, and there you have the 1 in 6, and there's no clear, distinct flavor of wine, but it's one of many additional flavors that are being added to the wine. There's more reason to be lenient. And then finally, he says that, but still, even with that whole argument that when there are multiple additives, there's reason to be lenient, but remember, according to Rav Moshe, a Baal Nefesh should still be machmir. And so having multiple additives other than just sherry will not settle the issue for a Baal Nefesh. So therefore, the rest of the Sefer is a listing of all of the different scotches that are available on the market as of last year when this book was published. I passed it out last week. I didn't bring it with me this week. But it lists every single scotch that he is aware of, made in Scotland. And he lists whether it is completely no good, whether it is good only according to Rav Moshe, and whether a Baal Nefesh should be machmir, or whether even a Baal Nefesh can drink it. So, look, we already have the psak of Rav Miller for the COR, so that's why our shul will permit all different kinds of liquor to come into the shul, unless we know for sure that it's a wine-based liquor, such as a cognac or a brandy, right? But barring a cognac or a brandy or a liqueur that may have other additives such as glycerin that may be halachically problematic, we generally permit all scotch, even scotch that's finished purely in sherry casks. We are lenient on all other whiskeys that are unflavored, because sometimes the flavored whiskeys can have problematic additives to them as well. And that's really the policy. But when you really look at the sources and you understand Rav Moshe's line of reasoning, you say to yourself, okay, I hear, I can either choose to be lenient like Rav Moshe, or I can choose to say, if the majority of poskim say that the sherry is an issue, especially nowadays where they will actually cook the wine into the casks so that it'll seep out in the strongest way possible, you sort of have to ask yourself that up to what point am I prepared to sort of create my own different reality from what is really happening. You know what I'm saying? In other words, so I'm not saying that you necessarily have to be machmir, but what I do is that I'll do like Rav Moshe. If I'm offered a l'chaim, never at a Kiddush club, of course, but if I'm offered a l'chaim after davening and someone's walking around with a bottle or someone's making a tikkun for a yard site and they offer me l'chaim, so I don't raise any issues. If someone gives me a bottle that is of liquor that's finished in a sherry cask, I'm not going to not drink it because of that. But when I go to the liquor store, if I go to LCBO and I want to buy myself a bottle of liquor, I will always try to avoid the purchase of Scotch where it says explicitly finished in sherry casks. Number one, probably because it's too expensive for me. But even beyond that,
They're all expensive.
they're all expensive, right? Today, there are so many options. The sherry the Scotch that's finished in bourbon casks, I can't tell the difference between the Scotch that's in bourbon casks and the Scotch that's in sherry casks. I personally can't tell the difference. Now, someone will tell me, I don't know if anyone's out there in the audience tonight in this shiur who will tell me, oh, you're an Am Haaretz. I can tell the difference. I'll just remind you of what one of my friends told me, someone who davens in the shul. He says he can't stand it when these faux connoisseurs say that they can really tell the difference between a $100 bottle of Scotch and a $500 bottle of Scotch. So he decided that one day he would play a trick, and he took the cheapest bottle of Scotch he could find and poured it into an empty bottle of a really expensive bottle, the most expensive used bottle that he could find, and he offered it to someone who swore that he knew the difference, and the guy said, that's a $500 bottle of Scotch. And the truth is, a lot of this is psychological to begin with. So,
But that's an urban legend. I can't tell you how many people have told me that.
someone told me he himself did it.
Yeah, I know, but a lot of people have told me the same thing.
Right.
So one day I experimented and I took the worst Scotch and put it in an expensive bottle and nobody knew the difference.
Nobody knew the difference. Well, try it.
I hear that
You never
all
know.
the time.
Try it. Maybe it'll work for you.
What's the OU's position?
The OU is Machmir like Rav Belsky. Glenmorangie is a Scotch that is not matured in sherry casks and has the OU. I think maybe there are others, but the last time I checked, the Glenmorangie is the only Scotch that has
The original Glenmorangie.
the original
So,
Glenmorangie.
yeah, but there are offshoots of Glenmorangie
Yeah.
that are aged in.
Right,
What
right.
about somebody that lives in the States and has got that chumrah and comes here and then, shul?
Shatovo alav bracha. You know, I mean, what's
No,
the only
does he
problem
have
is
to-
if you're more
does he have to
makel,
be
not if you're
about
more
nefesh?
machmir.
I mean,
What?
Does he have to hold as a chumrah because?
Oh, you mean, do you have to adopt the chumras of the place where you came from
I
if
don't
you're
know.
going to a more lenient place?
The
I
Minhag
don't know.
HaMakom.
That only works for Pesach.
I don't know, I'm asking.
The Minhag HaMakom doesn't apply for this.
Do any companies make sherry casks the old way with actual real sherry casks or everybody now?
I mean,
makes it with real sherry?
I imagine that people are still, the winemakers are still using barrels. I mean, you go to any wine manufacturer, like you go to Oxnard, where they make the Kedem wine, or you go to Israel, and you see they're manufacturing, they still use casks.
Right.
In Israel, they import the casks, I think, from, was it Spain or Ireland? I'm trying to remember where they're importing them from, the big barrel makers. So they are storing them, but typically, I'm told that a lot of times they'll just reuse the same barrel. There's no, at some point, it's no longer cost effective to import sherry casks from another country. It used to be that they were just discarded, and therefore it was easy to import them to manufacture Scotch. But now apparently, whatever the cost price is involved, it's no longer become price effective to do that.
So going back to Rob Belsky's list, who's Rob Belsky?
No,
Who's the Diane, who?
Rav Belsky was the one who was the posek of the OU who said that you should stay away from sherry
I see.
casks. Yeah.
So it wasn't Rob Belsky's list, but even on the list of what you absolutely can't drink, what may and what is maybe, what is on the list as Scotch you can't drink? Rav Moshe would still say you can.
Correct. Rav Moshe would still say it's okay. Now, the last argument is that the author of this sefer wants to argue that some of the barrels that they use today are so powerfully, have such powerful seepings of wine absorbed, that Rav Moshe's Metzias was different from what they do today. His Metzias was adding a little bit of wine, of actual wine, into the blended whiskey. Here, the author over here is arguing, I guess based on other poskim that he's consulted with, that some of these barrels which have absorbed wine may actually even be worse than Rav Moshe's scenario. So that's part of his argument. So it could be that he might, we haven't asked Rav Moshe. He hasn't been around since 1986. So we can't ask him what his opinion of what his response to this would be. But my gut tells me that he would probably say still that it's okay. And that's certainly what Rav Miller holds. That's Rav Miller's interpretation of Rav Moshe.
But the confusing part is that that's based on taste, right? And Rav Moshe seemed to be talking about the physical property of whatever this liquid now is.
Correct.
So that you're
Rav
not.
Moshe says even though it adds good flavor, good
Right.
taste to it,
It's not.
it's kiyuha ba'alma.
Right. So, but we're not in sherry casks. Nobody's actually putting sherry into the Scotch. It's imparted into the flavor. It's only the flavor. There is no physical
Yes, but
sherry that's being put
see,
in.
normally, Chuck, we hold ta'am ki'ikar. We say ta'am ki'ikar,
Right.
and the flavor is tantamount to the actual substance.
Okay,
So based on that, they want to argue that this is even worse.
fine.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
if you wear a watch on Shabbos, then you're fine.
I guess, I don't know. I'm not sure what you could be Madama Milsa La Milsa like that.
That's where he says,
What a Bal Nefesh also, yeah. Well,
you wear a watch.
yeah. You could be a Bal Nefesh for one thing and not a Bal Nefesh for another. It's not
That's
like
legitimate, right?
it's not like all Bal Nefeshes are exactly the same, you know.
That is legitimate, so you could decide that I want to be a Baal Nefesh in this issue, but not
Yeah,
another issue.
for sure,
Yeah.
for sure.
If you've decided you want to be a Baal
It's
Nefesh,
totally
then
legitimate.
everywhere you see
Listen,
that.
right.
you have to-
Look, the bottom line I'm trying to say is that you have a heter. If you want a heter, you have a heter, but I fail to see the reason to rely on the heter when there's so many scotches, really good quality scotches that are available, where you can totally avoid the issue. I really fail to see that, it's like there's like a Yetzer Hara that I gotta have the sherry cask. It doesn't seem, I personally, because maybe I'm not a drinker, maybe that's why I don't understand it, but I'm saying if someone could explain it to me, maybe I could understand it better. Anyway, okay, have a good night, everyone.